Welcome to our 7th meeting on Rural Community Food System. Welcome all. Before we get started, I'd like you to note that the wonderful people at Kumu implemented 2 new features for us yesterday or the day before. One of them has to do with the showcase feature. Well, it actually has an impact on the showcase feature. Previously, when you clicked on one of these buttons at the bottom to look at a showcase for a particular loop, you couldn't see anything else. What they did is they added what's called a background opacity feature so that you can specifically indicate the intensity of the background. So I tried it at 0.5 and you could see too much of it, and at 0.3 you couldn't see enough of it to tell that it was actually there. So it highlights what it is that you've selected, but you can still see the background that's there. The other thing they implemented was a notification color feature, which is why all of the asterisks are now bright red rather than white. So those are 2 new things that they added. They still haven't figured out how to solve the problem of this. Is Klaus here?
Not yet.
Is Klaus is in the wrong meeting, I think. Hold on. Invite Klaus. Copy URL for Klaus. I just sent Klaus the right connect. Maybe there was an old, well, every time you register, you get another connect URL. So I think he was on one of the old ones. So those were the 2 things that they added that I thought were useful, but I continue to say that it would be nice if they went ahead and figured out how we could get rid of the asterisks, which are no longer valid because we changed the names and the links no longer work. We'll see what they come up with that. But it looks like there are actually fewer asterisks on the map than there were. So some of them might have still been valid. Well, continue to work with them on that. Then, Brian, you want to make a few comments about the 100 changes you made in the last 2 days?
Let's have a philosophical comment about references. I'm going back and forth, and I know you've made some suggestions also.
Could you be a little louder?
Okay, can you hear me? Okay.
Well, maybe it was my headphones that were turned down. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. So, oh, I got a couple of comments from somebody. Oh, wait, I'll do it the wrong way. I know that you mentioned before, Dean, about do we want to have a large number of references, or do we want to try to get it down to a few good ones? And I can go both ways on that, because on the one hand, I don't think any one of us is going to know enough about everything in order to really have a handle on it. It's going to have to be a group process. So some references are going to be meaningful to me, but may not be meaningful to John or Bob, because they have different perspectives or different ways of going at the problem. They may be more interested in environmental or community health than maybe business practices. So I do think that it's a good idea to take them out of the reference issue and put them into someplace they're more applicable. But even then, what I try to do is that when I found something, I put it someplace else, but I left a marker saying where it went to, so that people went to references, they could see it. But how long is that viable for? Because we're going to get so many. So I'm still trying to figure out how to find the right balance so that when somebody brand new comes in, they can go through and they say, okay, this is what I'm interested in. These are the references that are applicable to that area. And then maybe later on see how those are related to, through the map, to other areas of concern. Hopefully that makes sense.
I think it makes sense. In other words, I have this reference that I think is relevant, but I'm not sure where to put it, so I put it in references.
Right.
And then somebody else finds it in references and says, I think I know where this belongs. I then take it out of references and I put it someplace, and I leave a note as to where I put it. And if you put things in the issues, let's see, what is it? Okay. I remember that agriculture of the middle is something that came up someplace.
Yes.
There's a reference to ag middle in these two issue threads. I don't know what it is in there someplace. Okay. So you can search the issue threads.
Okay. Now, it may not be ag middle in both of those. It may be ag in one and middle in another one. It doesn't necessarily, it will search, it doesn't search the combined term. It searches both terms individually.
Really?
Yeah, you can't necessarily say, take a look inside and see if you can find it. Now, it may be, in this case, it may be. In this case, you may
Well, I don't know if I can tell if I can find it or not.
That's the problem. There's so much information. It's so dense. It's almost
Okay. So though if you take them and you put them into the individual element someplace, you can search. All right.
right.
So ag middle appears in all four of these, and you can select any one of them to look at, or you can hold down the shift key and hit enter, and you just selected all four of them, so you can go look to see what ag middle might be there. Oh, there's one right there, ag middle. Okay. And here's ag, and middle maybe somewhere else.
It's the same article. It's a different article.
Right. Here's an ag middle right here.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
but that's a little bit of an advanced search procedure.
say it again?
That's more of an advanced search procedure. You got to be used to doing those kind of searches, and not everybody is.
Well, that's why I just did it. So,
okay.
so at least there are 6 or 7 people that are familiar with it. So, other people have thoughts about what we do with references?
Part of my part of my thinking is something that Klaus said in one of the other issues about the purpose of this endeavor is to create an understanding, not to find a solution, but so when new people come in, they'll get a greater understanding of what the system is. And with that in mind, as I thought, trying to keep references as open as possible.
Okay.
Would it make sense to create some hierarchy in references? Because if we randomly shuffle through the topics for someone new to come in, they don't know what is the reason for step 4, if I don't know what step 1 is. Does that make sense?
We made a little bit of, it's not so much a hierarchy because I don't know what's the top of the hierarchy and what's the bottom, but by putting things in their particular categories, you know, whether it's community health or environmental, whatever, we try to make it so if somebody's interested could go through a certain pathway. But being that we're now making most of this stuff, except in terms of strength, equal, I'm not sure where to start. I mean, there may be different, what would it be, classifications? What do you call it when you have species differentiation.
Taxonomy?
Taxonomy, or maybe a different taxonomy that one could apply here, but I'm not sure what it is. I mean,
So I mean, from my perspective here, the need for food systems to regenerate themselves in this way that we have laid out here is first and foremost driven by the need to mitigate the impact of climate change.
okay.
So that because the urgency behind this transformative change is leading back to climate change and the need to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere, because the energy systems are will never be able to power down in the time that is left to do so. So if we put this at the very top of the aim of the system is to shift towards basically put carbon into soil. So in discussions that I'm in with scientists and other groups, you know, we pretty much drilled it down to saying put carbon into soil is the imperative.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
And then how do you go from there to the next thing?
Okay.
Okay, so the food system needs to change. All right, so what does that mean? So already in this article, The Future of Farming, or the Battle for the Future of Farming, you have basically two directions that are being pursued currently. One is by the industry, and there is a company called Indigo Arc. You know, if you go online, I should send you the link. Indigo Arc. They have what is called the Terratron Initiative. They want to sequester, 1 trillion tons of carbon into the soils through agriculture. But the way they go about it is by encoding seeds with fertilizers and pesticides, and doing micro applications of fertilizers and pesticides to reduce the footprint. But it maintains their business model. So for example, they also are working with genetic manipulation of animals so that they can work in CAFOs and eat soy and corn and not get sick. So they're working with genetically manipulating livestock, so they can basically, it's going to be a lap on hooves, so to speak, I call it. So that's one direction, because in order for the food world to maintain their current business models, they need homogenization of products. They need shelf life, and they need products to be processable, in an industrial setting, assembly line setting. Then you have the other side that is roughly titled regenerative organic. And so that is where all the NGOs are working. That's where the 4 per 1,000 initiative was created, coming out of the the Paris Accord. There was a subset, so the French government promoted this. The German government is in it. So that's now a worldwide initiative to shift out of industrial and into regenerative organic. And that is the battle for the future of farming, in a nutshell. So this system here is completely at the mercy, really, of what the systems input is. When we talked on Tuesday about the system of systems, and it is completely dependent on it, because the control of the supply chain and the control of public communications via advertising and public relations and so on is much too strong to subvert on a grassroots basis. I mean, it's not going to happen at scale.
Klaus, would you, the last sentence, could you redo that again?
In order to make an impact, these changes have to happen at scale.
Okay.
And currently, you have an industrial food system that powers down a path that is not regenerative organic. It continues to manipulate the natural systems in ways that is less destructive, but still destructive. And it certainly is not focused on the sequestration of carbon into recreating healthy soil.
It's a system based on extraction, and they're doing everything possible to continue to prop up their business model, even though it's not sustainable.
Right.
So that the overall implication of that business model makes things worse over time.
Yes.
Okay.
So that, just to jump in for a second, in relation to Brian and Klaus, the idea that, I have an interest in healthcare, but that isn't necessarily a different category when framed into the lifespan of the ecosystem completely. And so the reference of framing becomes important to also scale within the duration of time we're talking about. And I think that then creates the narrative for the story of the duration of the ecosystem that we're trying to promote and move forward. And the object would be to frame it into other periods of time or scales of time, or even not have that conversation. Then it becomes worried about what your next meal is or how you're thriving in an economic system rather than looking at the whole duration.
But in terms of deciding where to put a particular article, you need to be able to give new people some means of finding things.
Right. And that's why I was throwing that into the idea of, if you're walking into this as a new person, there is a definition of time duration as part of what this system is about.
Okay, so that would need to be mapped into the system somehow or other. So somebody needs to put that on, because, I mean,
I would not recommend that a new person not versed in systems thinking to some extent ever walk into this map. Okay? In other words, for someone who has been engaged in a discipline for some period of time, my focus has been trying to provide a set of crib notes or crutches or whatever you want to call them to enable them to ferret out what it is we think we've done. For new people, it needs to be put together in a presentation that presents aspects of it for certain intents, but never presents all of it.
Right.
I would never, this is not a map intended for public consumption.
okay.
Which then creates the need to have some sort of, and Brian, for lack of a better word, hierarchy, where you are sequencing into the topic, saying, why are we even talking about this? Why is this important? So it's to put carbon into soil. Then we can talk about healthcare, to say that the pathology currently in the soil is directly reflected in the pathology of the human population. Because the way we are growing and processing food today has created a health care crisis in the United States.
What we are eating is making us sick.
Yeah, 80% of American healthcare is nutrition cost. Diabetes, obesity, the cancers. I mean, it all leads back to. I mean, most of it leads back to nutrition. But then there are other benefits. For example, there are groups that are focused on water, because water has become such a big issue with climate change. And a soil that is rich in micronutrients, in microorganisms, holds soil. It works like a sponge. versus the industrial soil, which is basically deprived of any organic matter, washes out like sand. It just washes out into the streams.
Right.
So there are the benefits, may mean something different to different people. And so, for example, here in Oregon, there are groups that want to talk about water. So that's what I focus on. I said we need to get carbon into soil for water. We need to get carbon into soil for healthy food. So this is what Gene is saying. You can make argumentations that mean different things to different people, but always lead back to the same thing.
Okay, so from that perspective, at this point, do we continue to evolve this map, or do we try and figure out where the leverage points are and how to present a cross section of this to a group of people that are not versed in what we have been doing?
Personally, the changes I've made so far to the map, I all consider to be rather mechanical. I mean, basically what I've been doing is going into loops, doing, walk around narratives, basically seeing how everything connects together. And I'm still in the process of delving into this system, getting information or insight from it. I mean, I think there's still places I can look and say I can get a deeper understanding just what was presented here. Now, one thing I keep in mind is I was not part of the team that actually birthed this system. I came in later. Other people were responsible for creating this thing initially. And hopefully I've kept true to whatever they had in mind. But for myself, I still think that I can still keep on delving into this system and finding out new information from it and getting a deeper understanding.
And I put this together yesterday, I think, this set of crib notes, which is one more element of this Systems Wiki Collaborate stuff. And one of the items on the crib notes, ooh, what did I do? Oh, that's interesting. I actually pushed it up. One of the items has to do with loop sequencing and labeling. That each one of these loops that we have defined, the loop labels need to be expanded to indicate the primary intent of the loop, so that this reinforcing loop primarily is responsible for the growth of something, probably the local sustainable food system, where there are other loops that are more responsible for other things. Which is this one? Considering the minors and majors. Oh, this is one of those connections that you mentioned that doesn't have an arrow on it.
I thought I put them all back. Did you? Why don't you go ahead and update?
There's 29 updates since. Yes. Brian is wreaking havoc with my mind again. So okay, so it's there. So this one, which is 02, is probably also focused primarily on the local sustainable food system in terms of the intent, which is why if you look at the loop labels, there are reinforcing loops which are simply intended to promote growth, but they're not really considered virtuous or vicious. And the balancing loops, the loop is either goal-seeking, stabilizing, or stagnating, and labeling the loops as to what it is how they perform, and that was weird. All right, so that this is a reinforcing loop. What is and it's got 4 stocks in it, all of which are growing, but there's a primary intent of the loop so that for someone else to quickly understand the overall intent, this isn't even a loop.
No, it's not.
Not anymore. It's not. It's been changed so that something goes, one of these is going in the wrong direction. So this needs to be fixed. But when it does get fixed, it needs to be labeled 10R or something, okay? So that one gets a sense of the primary implication of this loop so that people don't just look at them and say, well, this is 10R. You look at it and say, all right, this is 10R, desire for local food, which is the primary implication of this loop. The primary implication of this loop is, well, I don't know what the primary implication is because it's not a loop, but let me try something else.
You could bring desire for local food back to health because it will improve health.
Okay. So, I mean, there's some work to do here in terms of labeling all of these with something more descriptive than just a sequence number. In addition to what Brian has been doing in terms of providing a narrative to go with them that sort of walks around the loop to describe what the loop is doing. Piecemeal. And then we have some more pieces that we have floating around here that we either need to decide to leave disconnected or figure out where to connect them. And does it make sense to do that collectively in a group or between meetings? I mean, the time that I spend pondering something in the map is probably long enough for other people to take a nap. So that doing it collectively is, to me, is not a good use of other people's time because I can't look at it and ponder and talk at the same time. I have to think about it, and I don't think it's appropriate to waste people's time.
What would be helpful is if we can focus on the systems, system of systems, whatever we framed this line, and create. Can you highlight it, Gene, up the systems of systems up? Yeah, that area there.
This part.
Yeah. Exactly. So systems value system. So because that is basically where what I was saying earlier, the battle for the future of farming is being decided. So we can push within the system and engage the public and so on, but that really is where the lever is located. So until there already is general consensus, that yes, we need to put carbon into the soil, because when you look at the Terraton initiative, for example, that is the idea of putting carbon into soil. It's just the way we go about it. Is completely. It comes from two completely different directions. One is the perpetuation of an existing system that wants to maintain itself, and the other one is to regenerate nature and to basically have a fresh start. And just for the influence factors, that define how this value system is being shaped, I think so that's sort of what really occupies me right now, because we need to find leverage points to push that out, to shift that.
Well, that's going to take a lot of degrees.
I didn't quite understand that, Brian.
Well, Kumu calls each causal step, each of these links between a cause and effect or a correlated relationship a degree. And so in order to get to what they're talking about, we're going to have to take a number of causal steps away from here to where the system exists. I mean, if you keep on pushing the focus button, you keep on pushing to go farther out. You see, you keep on going. So we're now 3 degrees. You can keep on going further 4. And before we have a complete system, what we consider to be cohesive, it's like 6 or 7 degrees out. And all of them are involved in this system, and all of them have to be considered, at least to some extent.
You're right, correct. So that simply looking at this, simply looking at this and the direct connections to it are insufficient to get an understanding of what's really happening. You're looking at it from essentially from a cause and effect perspective, because it's one dimension of interactions.
The power system is actually nonlinear.
Is what?
Nonlinear.
Yes. Yes. Which gets back to my comment about me pondering.
There's a lot of pondering going on in this system.
Right.
Yeah, I have a question here for the group, and talking about the value system here, which could change over time. My question here is, how would this affect the value system of those corporations that are really involved in the production of our food? And having asked that this is going to be a radical change for their business model as the value system changes. So I guess my alongside that question is the thought that there should be some feedback or some loop coming from this change in value system towards the corporate world, wherein the same value system should be adopted. So I guess the connection is, how do we build the connection? Is it the society that would clamor for, for specific area that would kind of force the corporate to change because of the ever-changing needs of the society? Or this is probably a multi-pronged approach wherein the whole ecosystem should somehow interact with each other, not just the society as a whole, but there are areas too, like the NGOs. How are they gonna somehow influence those people in charge of the production itself? So I guess it's something that I'd probably a good point of discussion here.
So is systems value system really an appropriate label for this element? Whose value system is this? We have multiple stakeholders involved or engaged in various aspects of the system, and I don't think that having one value system element that represents all of them is appropriate. I think that's partly what Romer was saying, in terms of each one of the stakeholders from their perspective is operating based upon their value system.
But there's going to be an overall winner in that value system that's going to define what the overall system is. Right now, our system is defined by economics and profit. And we're trying to find ways, and we need to disrupt the entire system so that it changes to what Klaus was saying about regeneration and putting the carbon back into soil. But it's going to take multiple pathways in order to do that. There's not going to be one silver bullet solution to this problem. It is a wicked problem.
But there's a widely shared incentive here. And I'm going to key off of something Klaus said a moment ago about diabetes and other American maladies, right? So you hear of people who have to make a choice between can they afford their medications or eat? Well, what medications are they taking? And I hope this doesn't sound like rolling a grenade into the tent, but this is a clash between big agriculture and big pharma. Why am I taking these medications? It's because of what I've been eating for a long time. Now, that gives everybody an incentive in here because somebody knows somebody, their parent, their child, whatever, that is taking a medication because of what they have been eating. And I'm starting to change my attitude, my beliefs about this, about the whole GMO thing in you guys' direction.
That's because you're with us talking about this, but the vast majority of Americans aren't there.
Yes, agreed. I can't grocery shop at Whole Foods and most of the time. I can shop at Kroger, maybe Walmart. Well, what's on the shelf at Kroger and Walmart is sometimes a little bit up in the air.
But when you make the change from going back to the problem right now, part of the problem is that Whole Foods and all other places that have organic foods and all the things we want are usually more expensive. And when you make the change so those costs come down, you are going to have unintended consequences within the system, especially providers of those farms. They're going to have a lower profit margin. So that change is not going to be so simple.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. And when you watch the commercial on TV, it's 15 seconds advocating and 45 seconds, don't take this if you're allergic to it. Oh, let's see, when do I find out that I'm allergic to it?
After you take it.
And I take it the first time? Okay.
I mean, one of the things I suggest is that people start going into the map themselves. I mean, so far it's been mostly Klaus, Gene, and me who have been working on the map from various aspects. You know, and I think people, if they start running through the map themselves and maybe experimenting or looking at things, you know, that would bring, you know, maybe greater clarity to the map. I mean, I definitely have a perspective or a bias on this.
Well, the people who spend the most time working on the map result in the map having more of their bias than anyone else's.
Right.
I mean, it's sort of given. So to that end, Romer, Veronique, and Diego, you could send me your Kumu username so I can plug you into the members for this map. Or you could just give them to me right now and I'll do it. If you have one.
Yes. So I'll just, I might actually be on there. Maybe not. So it's D Bodart, capital D. Well, I don't think that matters. Bodart.
Right there?
Yep, top one. That's me.
Romer, you have an ID?
Yeah, I forgot mine. We can try RL Benitez or.
Would that be you?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Apparently, I didn't forget it. Thank you, Gene.
You're welcome.
Mine is just my first name and last name, Veronique Omen.
There it is, right there. Good. Well, we solved that. So don't send me an email.
So if we come back to this idea of creating uh, a sequence, a hierarchy, you know, and we start with carbon into soil, then we can branch into health, for example. And health may be a primary mover to some part of the population to engage in. Actually, it's a huge part of the population that would be here. But the reason I come back at this system value systems is that until there is a broad consensus, you know, that goes into the system in the form that products are being advertised, they're being promoted, being positioned, the population will not understand what this is. It will always be contentious. It will always be contradicted. You know, be like every information we have that is meant to influence public opinion. So at this point, changing the food system depends on beliefs. You know, so the way people believe about climate change. Yes or no? Is it true or what is it? And the confusion around these topics prevents the system from evolving and becoming functional.
Klaus, it sounds like you're talking about an intentional paradigm shift.
Oh yeah, I mean, it is a paradigm shift, definitely.
Right. So maybe that's what we need an element, because right now the system's value of the system is what's concurrently existing. But we want to change what's concurrently existing to something else, which is the intentional paradigm shift. So maybe we need an element, intentional paradigm shift.
No, I don't, but do you want it on this map or do you want it on the 2B map? So that currently, it says the economy is centrally controlled by a systems paradigm that directs economic relationships downstream. And this paradigm governs the value system throughout the economy, which I think is appropriate for the way the system is at the moment.
It's not this map.
Though I think the conversation of the moment is...
It seems like the paradigm shift would...
Go ahead. Hello? I cut somebody off.
It seems to me that the paradigm shift is sort of the proponent for the new map and not necessarily partake in it. Just
that makes sense to me.
Well, the paradigm shift...
Sorry, is my net a little bit...
You're breaking up. You're gone. Now you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Is that better?
Yes.
I don't know. I think... Okay. So what I was saying is that it seems that the paradigm shift, and I agree that an intentional paradigm shift is necessary here, and that would be sort of what brings the new map to be, not necessarily being a part of the...
We lost you again. For some reason, you end up getting muted. Your mic is muted, and it's happening automatically for some reason.
Now you're unmuted, Diego. Can you say that again?
All right, one more go. So saying is that the intentional paradigm shift is the proponent of the new map, but doesn't necessarily need to be in the new map in some way.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would agree with that.
Does that make sense?
Which is why we need to focus on the system value systems. You know? That's in my mind. That has to reflect the intention. We could remove system value system upstream, or we can move it upstream one level, and then we could showcase two intentions. One intention, regenerative agriculture. The other one is a perpetuation of industrial systems.
My sense is that you're identifying systems value system as a leverage point for driving the current system into the desired system, and it would require that there be additional influences on the current systems value system beyond what's already on the map. Because I mean, the only direct influence at the moment is implications. I mean, there are others downstream, well, implications and education. So that either focusing on improving the level of education and using that to alter the value system, along with the awareness of the implications, causes the value system to evolve to something that's more appropriate for the future.
Yes.
So it's not just education or just implications. It's the education in terms of the implications of the current value system that result in an evolution of the value system to be something more appropriate.
With the caveat that the current system is heavily weighted to a certain way, so it's very hard to change it.
Right, but I keep going back to this map. This map. I mean, I've shared this with numerous people in terms of they build a map of this is the system as it is, at least the way they believe it is. And then they actually went through and said, here's where we think the leverage points are in the system and why. And because here is the strategic intent.
But in order to do that, you have to have a deep understanding of what the system is now, which is where the pathway I'm still on.
Right. And I think it's appropriate to continue to catch ourselves when we begin to mix. How is it and how would we like it to be? Because it's real easy to do.
Plus, it looks like there's a few mistakes in the system that need to be ironed out.
Which is not surprising.
Not at all.
But that does make sense, Gene. I think we already have several streams in there which you could isolate to put pressure on the system to shift. You know, from within the community, because it has to be a grassroots upward movement.
Right. I mean, that's where the demand has to drive the system.
Yes.
Right.
I think that also, in addition to that, it's not just a bottom-up approach, but if we also have a top-to-bottom approach wherein the leadership has also the drive to shift and be able to adopt the change, then I think it's far more effective.
But when you say the leadership, who are you referring to? Monsanto and Cargill, and I mean, they're not going to change their mode of operation unless it's financially beneficial to them.
Well, there's actually a study that I would like to share with the group later on. I'm going to learn how to post the references here. And this is from Henderson Institute. I think it was under BCG. And the business model change gears towards definitely consideration of the different stakeholders. You have the consideration for growth of business, societal impact, and the other one is the economic consideration. Those three areas, the intersection of that is really a competitive advantage for them. So I guess as a businesses, realizes how this model works and how they can gain a sustainable competitive advantage in the long run, I think there could be a major shift.
They're beginning to realize
might be slow.
they're beginning to realize they're their own worst enemy.
They're beginning to realize that it's really the people's needs that needs to be put in here, and that's where sustainability comes. If we truly understand that and we cater to that in a very responsible way, I think the society will acknowledge that and will reward it.
I'm a bit more
So we need the
pessimistic.
voice.
I'm a bit more pessimistic.
Other
A lot
both
of this is greenwashing.
Well, say it again, Brian.
I'm a bit more pessimistic that a lot of this rhetoric is greenwashing. But basically, this is just corporations doing something for public relations. And a lot of times these changes do not actually take place. And I use the term greenwashing because so many years ago, everybody started talking about how they're going to start making products. And those changes have not been as prevalent as people thought they were going to be.
Brian, I would. Oh, go ahead, Brian. Sorry.
Okay. Volkswagen is still cheating on diesels. Those type of things are still coming out in the news. So we can't just depend upon them. The system is going to have to be disrupted.
So,
But Brian, take a look at the case of Volkswagen. What happened to their stock price when they did that? I guess there is a punitive part in it where the society really, would reward those companies that are truly, looking after it.
Right. But
Look
look
at
what
Tesla.
BP did after the oil spill. They came up with all these wonderful commercials about how great they were. And I doubt very many people even remember the oil spill in the Gulf anymore.
which oil spill?
That's one example.
Yeah.
Well, no, I meant there were many of them. I mean, it's just,
Oh, but the
The big one.
But Homer still raises an important point in regard to leadership, because the groups that are working to change the system are not coordinated. They are working in silos. They're working on micro level specific targets, and therefore they're easily diffused. They're ineffective. So there is an attempt now to coordinate across a range of NGOs, for example, to coordinate these efforts and to work on common targets, shoot towards common objectives. And that means there has to be a broad-based consensus, on what is important on a priority ranked basis. So if putting soil into carbon is the overarching priority, then how do you go down into the system, into various components of that system, and empower and enable subgroups, who are working on micro-targeting to be effective and ultimately achieve the same outcomes. And that has to be, in my mind, a decentralized, grassroots effort, but you still need leadership. You need thought leadership.
So in some ways, the system that we're trying to envision and to bring about would have to be self-organizing.
It has to self-organize around common principles.
Right. Indeed.
I mean, for example, the Sierra Club just asked me to take leadership on partnering with Regeneration International, with the 4 per 1,000 initiative, so that we can develop training materials for their 3.5 million members in hundreds of chapters to take grassroots, community-based action. So they want to get started and launch, and I'm going, let's step back here and develop, first of all, a strategy, and who are we talking to about what?
I just shared a link which goes to what I think Klaus is talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you want to put that in the references also?
I'll do it later on.
Okay. All right. And Klaus, I think that your EcoTrust project of the middle, AG of the middle, is already in here.
Yeah, yeah, it's in multiple places.
And the other one that you put in there for Indigo is already in there also.
Okay.
Okay. So what do we do next? What is it that we should focus on right now? Oh, we're done. No.
No. I mean, again, a lot of times working with the map is a very mechanical thing that, you know, it's just going through and taking the elements and the connections and putting them in, or, you know, describing them, or, you know, making the markup, markdown, you know, changes in the narrative boxes, or creating new loops and saying what the pathway is. I just created a loop 25. You know, I'm showing your Facebook page. No, hold on.
Who is that? How'd that happen?
No, it's me.
What do you mean it's you? You select.
I don't know how I got the. Oh, here I'm back. Okay, now I'm back. Okay, sorry. I got.
All of a sudden, all of these were selected, and I didn't.
See, we can't affect your map. I can't touch your map.
I know that.
I lost my train of thought. What was I just talking about? I'm getting senile moments.
What is this loop?
Go to 25. Search.
So I'm actually wondering if we could distill some insights out of this. Because at the end of the day, what you want is things like this to generate a narrative that's helpful to the discussion. Right?
There.
That's a loop?
Well, maybe not, but it can be. If you go further.
It can be.
Yes. If you add any of the balancing loops with it, then it becomes a loop.
Okay, but as it's currently defined, right?
Yeah.
That's not a loop.
No.
Okay.
I have an observation from software maintenance and software quality assurance that, at least in some older languages, that a program could get to the point where we called it spaghetti code.
Oh, we throw it away and start over again?
Well, maybe, but you take a strand and you pull it, and you follow the thread of the logic, and oh, well, that's a dominant thread right there. And maybe you can reorganize the thing around some dominant threads without completely revamping it, or at least that's the way to pull the dominant threads out for a fresh start.
Well, that, and I worked on the drug pricing model with someone for several months, and more than once along the way, I just took the current map and put it away and started a new one, because it became so convoluted I couldn't keep track of what it was that I was working on. So I started over again. And each one ended up getting better, but it was painful to say, well, let me take what I've learned in this mess rather than continuing to play in it, and go back and figure out where the real emphasis is. And the final model was amazingly simple.
We have
simply.
all the components here. We have all the moving parts framed. I think we have the story at least assembled in components, which may not be most logically connected. So yeah.
So that's why I go back and start with 01 and look at that. Really? Oh, okay. I look at 01 and I re-ponder the connections, and then I say, okay, look at 02 and see how it connects and relates, and I continue to try and evolve it and see if it makes sense, and try and filter things back, because it needs to unfold in an order that makes sense. And if I get to a point and say, well, 6 really ought to be between 2 and 3, then I'll go ahead and resequence the loops so that it unfolds in an orderly manner, which is why I'm trying to get them to change this from a showcase to a focus option, so that I could just unfold this rather than having to do this for each one of them. Well, what happened to 03? Our 3 loop is gone?
Same as 02.
Oh, so, okay, 4.
Gene, this is a really interesting way to look at it, because basically desire for local food is the outcome of what we're trying to achieve. That's the end point, and we're making it the starting point here.
Well, we made it a starting point because it was the extent of the current local food system that we thought we needed to understand, so we could figure out where the leverage points were to evolve it.
I mean, it's a perfectly logical way. The way the model evolved is perfectly logical, because that's how our conversation evolved.
Okay.
But now we are coming from the other end, saying there's a hierarchy here where moving carbon into soil is the overarching objective, and in order to accomplish that, we need to stimulate desire for local food, because it's an integral component of achieving that.
I understand, but now you're talking about the 2B model as opposed to the as-is model.
Probably,
Yeah.
I mean, you could throw this model away and start with the systems value system and build a relationship model from there to say, what is it that the systems value system is in fact promoting at the moment, and what are the implications of that? And then the question becomes, how do you alter the systems value system to cause all the rest of it to change?
Yeah.
So probably several of you have heard me say this in the past. Once upon a time, a blank sheet of paper was my absolute worst enemy, because I couldn't figure out where to start. And then finally I realized that it doesn't matter where you start. You can start any place that seems appropriate, and you will develop essentially a viable set of relationships from that starting point that helps you make sense of all of it. I finally got to a point of saying, if I start with the thing that I'm trying to understand, it helps me get a better sense of what's relevant, but not always. All right, so that we started here, the map has a shape to it because of where we started. If we started with systems value system, it would have a different shape, but it would probably have almost all the same pieces in it. Wouldn't look the same, but it would be pretty much the same.
I think we have content. We have pretty much all content that is relevant to this discussion already listed here. It's just a matter of changing the direction of the story, so we have a logic sequence and why the system needs to change, and then how can it change.
Is it possible for people to take alternative pathways? I mean, for myself, I'm still going to go in and try to go deeper into the system and understand it. But it does seem like there are possibilities of expanding or extending the system or changing the system to find different pathways.
I don't think I know what you mean.
Well, Klaus seems to be wanting to take what we have and build upon it and go and find specific direction for implementation. And I'm not quite at that stage yet. I'm still at the stage of, I think I can go deeper into the system and see what it's doing here. But is it possible for us both to take our own individual perspectives and work with this map?
Well, there's a relevant factors map here that was created by Brian, which is the same map, but a different view of it. This is the strong factors, and this is the medium to weak factors, and this is the strong and weak factors. He put all of these variants together simply by starting with this map and saying, duplicate this map.
Right.
So if Klaus wants to make a duplicate of this map and begin to work on a different perspective or a different set of interactions to bring back to the group to say, here are some thoughts that I have. I mean, that's one of the things that's so nice about this environment, is the fact that you can just go ahead and make multiple versions of this, or you can actually just fork this project and make one that belongs to you and do anything you want with it.
Okay, I need to make a point though, for people who may not be as familiar with Kumu. When you duplicate it, it's a good idea to change the name so you can tell the difference between your map. But you also need to change the name of the views. Okay, so Gene has got an introductory map and a view named Legend, okay, which is specifically what we were seeing before. This, what you're looking at your screen right now, is the strong factors view. Only those connections which are strong are listed on this map, and it's renamed strong factors. You don't want to change his legends accidentally. You need to be careful about that.
Yeah, because when you're looking at legend, if you go into settings, you can also come up here and say, duplicate this view.
Right.
So you can make another view, which is this script, which defines which things you're looking at in the way that you're looking at them, and change it however seems appropriate, which is why Brian has created all these different views that very quickly let him look at different segments of the map.
So Brian, what information do you need to complete what you think you want to do in regard to getting into a more complexity of the picture that you have evolved here?
The thing is I don't know right now. I just know that if I take different perspectives, I can maybe get more information. I think I'm pretty close to it. I mean, I've got some ideas of what I want to try to do. The main thing I keep on getting out of what I've been going through is that the current economic system is so strong that those changes that we're trying to make, those paradigm shifts through health or environment or governance or whatever they happen to be, right now are particularly weak, and we need to find ways of strengthening those before the change will occur. That's the kind of thing. I'm looking for those leverage points. Right now, we don't have a lot of really viable leverage points the system is going to be able to generate. That needs to change somehow, probably through some forms of disruption. So disruptive innovation.
So I mean, that's actually what I'm working on.
Right.
So for example, the Greta Thunberg youth movement, so we're trying to influence that by focusing them on food and on working with their caterings, with their school caterers, their college caterers, influencing their parents. So that those things in development. And those are very viable leverage points that can go to scale rather quickly. Once you light that fire, that can really move.
Right.
And so that is engaging with the Green New Deal, with the Sunrise Movement, Sierra Club, and these groups, and that's really on their way. It would be great to show them in a more systemic form, how to structure this movement and
Right.
where leverage points are. So this is sort of where my thinking is going.
And I encourage that, and I think we should. But I think having multiple pathways for various ones of us looking at different angles will only help the process. I mean, I think you definitely should go ahead and do what you're talking about, and I think other people should find other ways to do it, and we come back together again.
A friend of mine works at the USDA. He tells me that the received wisdom is pro-GMO. So the USDA has become an industry advocate agency, which is kind of what you think of the FDA. So
okay. So when that happens, you have to ask yourself, is that motivated in the best interest of the people or the producers who essentially probably own the place at the moment in terms of all of the lobbyists and the funding? Okay? I mean, Washington is not a healthy place. Right? In terms of their policies, I mean, most of this country is overweight because Washington lied to us for 50 years. Okay? Or I think so anyway.
Yeah, I mean, this brings us back to value system, because the entire regulatory process is so taken captive. I mean, you look from the Farm Bill, $1 trillion Farm Bill that supports sugar and tobacco and cotton, to the entire regulatory process that governs farming. I mean, for example, the insanity of this system: farmers cannot use cover crops because if they do, they can't get crop insurance, and without crop insurance, they can't grow their crop because it's below cost. And the government, the Farm Bill, makes up the difference. So and to put in a cover crop means that the cover crop is competing with the nutrients and the water available for the cash crop. So you have insane regulations in the system that prevent it from.
They're not actually insane because they're beneficial to somebody. All right. In other words, they may be insane to you and me, but the people who spent an awful lot of money to get them enacted, to them, they're not insane.
Right.
I mean, we need to be careful about, I think, how we portray them in terms of whose perspective we're commenting on them about. Okay, so from the health of the community, the perspective of big ag is not healthy because they're continuing to produce more and more food cheaper and cheaper that has less nutrition to it. But from their perspective, it makes complete sense because it's all about making money until the point that they simply begin to kill their market because everybody dies. Sorry. Don't get me started.
I understand what you're saying, but this comes back to values, and so this paradigm shift is required in the value sector.
Yes. Why I don't eat at McDonald's or shop at Walmart. You're breaking up. Who is speaking?
Veronica.
No, I'm actually not. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, that was not me.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so the question at hand is, between now and the next session, which may be next week, what should we individually focus on between now and then? I know what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk back through the sequence of the loops to see if they make more sense in more order, and if I can extend the loop labels somewhat. I found one that Brian did. I don't remember. What was it? You remember, Brian?
You mean 25?
Oh yeah, 25. That the impossible loop. That actually has someplace a label on it. Where is the label?
Then you need to search again for. I don't know why.
Policy impacts.
It's experimental right now.
I would go along with that. That is so. So that's what I intend to focus on the next 4 or 5 days. In terms of other people, I mean, you can focus on what you think helps you best understand what's there, and be able to make or voice comments about things that we should modify. You know, the easiest way to comment in this environment. What am I doing? Is to go to comments and simply add comments to the comments list. For all of those people who add comments to the comments list, you end up becoming a follower of that thread, and you will get a copy of every post that's made to comments. Though the alternative, now that you're actually on the list as members of this project, every time you come back here, you will see a number down here telling you how many issues there are that you are not up to date on. And it says 2, but it looks like, oh, it's probably one of these. Yeah, this one that was closed. How many issues there have been posts to that you haven't read. I'm trying to get them to open this at the bottom rather than at the top, so you don't have to scroll down through it. And while you're in here, if somebody else is also in here, okay. So somebody has made 3 updates to this map since I opened it, and you can go over here to activity, and you'll see that it was Diego that made these 3 changes 10 minutes ago, but they're not reflected on my map at the moment.
No, those were mistakes. Sorry.
We don't do mistakes here. We do trial and learning.
I was just touching things and things moved.
Okay. Which resulted in learning, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Sorry.
Gina, I have a question here.
Okay.
Yeah, since we are talking about trying to find certain levers that we could affect and influence the system here, would it be beneficial for us to have a complementary model showing all the actors of this entire ecosystem, and probably identify the balance of power, if that is somewhat measurable in a way? So I guess the reason why I brought that up is looking at the current map here right now. This is somewhat a combination of both the actors and the activities that are taking place. So trying to see, you know, just for more clarity as we move along.
You could start with a map that simply identifies the actors and then develops the set of relationships between the actors and identifies what those relationships are. And I think it would be quite informative. And you can do that, or if you want, we could try and do that in the next session.
Gene,
Yes.
if you go to competitive business elements or competing business elements,
This one?
right, click on that, and then click on competing food systems inside the narrative box.
Oh, here.
Oh, yeah, right. So, this is
Ah.
something I did some time ago. Go into the narrative box for this one and click Christopher Shate's original food system map.
Well, so what do you want me to do?
Go into the narrative box and click food. Go to the top. Go back to the top. Back to the top. Food system.
This one?
That one. This will work. And it's loading, and there. Okay. So this is something group ecology of systems thinking that Christopher Chase made a long time ago, describing what the current food system is, creating pollution, creating health problems, and all that. It's basically a rich picture. And what I did is I tried creating a causal loop document, the diagram map of this whole thing, which is what was there before, what you just came
What
with.
this is.
And what that is type of thing. And basically everything on the left-hand side of the map is industrial food farming and how it comes about. And then the small little two loops on the top right-hand side are basically what we're doing. But basically through a supply and demand configuration, okay? So maybe, my whole intention was maybe this gives people an idea of how much weight is actually being put on our system from this outside system.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good illustration. I know Christopher from conversations on Facebook. I mean,
Right, exactly, exactly. I mean, I had a map like this before, but I looked at it and I was like, God, this sucks. Okay, so I redid the whole thing.
This model I could probably understand.
Right.
The,
Supply and demand.
oh, I remember this one. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and I took this up something you did, but basically from an economic point of view, this is what's happening within our system at market level. But what we did, instead of making it balancing loops, we made it a series of reinforcing loops that have to go through retail and other things like that. So this is another way of looking at it.
So from all of this complexity in here, somehow to present it to the world, you figure out how to distill it down to something that looks like this. It leaves out all the detail, or it sort of abstracts all the detail into the elements and presents it in a simplistic fashion that anybody who can fill their bathtub could follow.
There's also an archetype, I think, involved with this, which is the success to the successful archetype. Because the industrial system, farming system is so successful, we keep on putting more energy and maintenance into that system.
Correct. Correct.
I've got it down below on this narrative at the bottom someplace.
On the bottom of this someplace?
Yeah, let it open up. Bottom of this narrative, competing food systems narrative. At the bottom, there's somewhere I talk about the, I thought I talked about it, maybe I'm wrong. All right, I must be wrong. Sorry, I thought I had it in there. Maybe I got rid of it.
Maybe you put it in there and took it out.
Yeah.
if I may throw in another wrench into the works here, we talked briefly about Donella Meadows,
Right.
finding leverage points in the system.
Yeah.
I've had another conversation with a group that is working on spiral dynamics, teaching, I mean, they're basically developing courses, how you apply spiral dynamics to talk to different actors within the spiral, let's say consciousness or the economy, whichever we want to frame it. If we overlay those two, if you are saying that spiral dynamics and Donella Meadows' hierarchy of a system, and you put that next to one another, you're really starting at the paradigm level, at the top of the hierarchy, and then you work your way throughout the stages of the economy, where the paradigm drives basically the entire system. So what this then means, if we are changing a paradigm at the top of the hierarchy, at level 4, 5, 6, it becomes more tactical, it becomes more administrative, and it becomes more consumer focused. So if we apply those two theories and side by side, we may be able to develop a communication structure that makes sense to different layers of the society.
Sounds very interesting, but paradigm level changes or mental model changes are the heaviest lifts the system can do.
Well, they're a heavy lift for a long time, and then they happen all at once.
Right, true.
All right, it goes.
Yes.
All right, and this last one down here, transcending paradigms. Every time I think I understand this one, I sort of lose the thought. But this, if for those who haven't read this article, I highly recommend it. It's a fabulous piece of work. And this is, I mean, it's not really long. It's probably maybe half a dozen pages. I posted the link in the chat room. And the links, well, this is already in here. The link to Brian's stuff is in the competition of large providers. Any other comments? We're approaching an hour and a half.
Interesting conversation.
I find it well, that's why I keep coming back. I'm glutton for punishment, maybe. I don't know. So,
I mean, it would be great, Brian, if you could structure some questions. I mean, I don't have the technical skills to really engage in the software, and I don't want to mess it up. But if you can structure some questions of what you're pondering, it would help me to respond.
Okay, let me go through and see. And it may not even come up with questions. It may be just sort of, okay, now I understand something, or I get. I just want to make sure that I've gone deep enough through this that I'm not missing anything, because there could be insights or epiphanies in here that I've missed because I just haven't looked at it the right way.
So I once worked for this amazingly intelligent woman who said to me, "The reward for arguing for your limitations is you get to keep them." And she sort of hit me right between the eyes, and it was a great wake-up call. So in terms of, yes, I understand that the environment is overwhelming. The way to overcome that is go play with it. And you can go play in a sandbox. And I mean, there are only three pieces there. There are simply elements, connections, and loops. And if you just create a brand new model and develop a relationship model of something, anything, the last argument you had with your spouse, it can be extremely developmental. Okay. Okay. Other comments as we're parting? Going once, going twice?
All right. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you for attending.
I just posted a link to Spiral Dynamics if for someone is not familiar with it.
Okay.
An introduction there.
And for when boom, let me just do this. When I post these, I'm now remembering that the content of this is from the last one. Here is the chat session from our last session. So under events, here are all the events that have happened for the last several months. And here's the new one for today, which will get moved down here after I post the video and update it. And all of you well, if you don't have it, here it is. You can grab this in the chat. There's a link to the entry point for my ongoing nightmare called Systems Wiki, which is not a wiki, but Systems Wiki is a label that's been with me for so long. I have it embedded in so many places I can't change it. Okay? Next Tuesday. Take care. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Take care, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.